With the United States of America having an election during a pandemic, it's fair to say that no matter who wins the US 2020 election, the victor will have a very messy economic situation to clean up. Whether it be a Republican or a Democrat, there'll be a lot of work to do in order to increase employment while also keeping an eye on a rapidly ballooning public debt. So, as Election Day approaches, we thought we would take a look at a few key issues that either the Democrats will inherit or the Republicans will continue to administer. Welcome to the US's post-election economy. One of the main scars left by the ongoing pandemic is the rapid and deep reduction in the economic output of countries across the globe, and the USA is no exception. According to the US Bureau of Economic Analysis, the US economy shrunk by an annualized 9% in the second quarter of 2020, and despite lockdowns being gradually lifted across various US states, the economy is still expected to register a contraction of 3.8% for the year as a whole. This means that whoever is president of the United States after the election results, they'll be in control of an economy that's been quite severely bruised. However, it's worth pointing out that current forecasts presented by the OECD suggest that the USA's economy is poised to bounce back in 2021, along with those of the international community, as pent-up demand and enormous stimulus packages unveiled by governments across the globe, including that of the US, kick in. With an estimated 4% growth in GDP forecast for next year, the overall picture paints towards a recovery in GDP to pre-virus levels by the end of 2021. All this, though, should be taken with a pinch of salt, as these are forecasts and the virus that triggered the economic shockwave is still not under control. So, what does this mean for the president? Well, it means that ensuring a safe environment which allows the US economy to remain open in as free a manner as possible remains an objective of prime importance, as the impact that this rapid economic contraction has had on sectors of the economy, such as the labour market, have been devastating. And that brings us to the next key issue that the POTUS will have to solve. At the peak of the economic slump in the US, millions of Americans lost their jobs, and that shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone watching this video. But what is important to note about the job shedding that took place was the speed at which people found themselves out of work. You see, back in February, the US's unemployment rate was just 3.5%. The labour market was tight, and many considered the US to be in full employment. However, just 2 months later, the unemployment figure was north of 14%, the highest since the Great Depression. Now, to offer some context in order to understand the speed at which unemployment rose, during the Great Recession back in 2008, the unemployment rate rose from 5.8% to 9.5% in a 12-month period. So, what took place earlier on in 2020 was extreme. Despite this, though, the unemployment rate has fallen, and significantly. As of September, it stood at 7.9%, with more than 11 million Americans already returning to work. However, the rate of job growth has decreased, as the economy has more or less completely opened up, and the more than 10 million jobs that are still gone as a result of the virus will continue to lead to economic difficulty for millions of Americans who still seek work, and will remain a priority for the POTUS. With all the stimulus and economic relief packages that have helped kept the US economy afloat, though, another issue will remain constant in the president's head, that of the government budget deficit. Most economists today agree with the idea that in a time of a recessionary gap, governments should look to increase aggregate demand in an economy. This is usually done through increased government spending or a reduction in taxes, or sometimes a combination of both. As we saw in the US government did increase government spending. Just remember that stimulus check that you totally spent on not alcohol and not drugs. Unfortunately, though, a violent increase in government spending also means a government budget deficit that is more intimidating than those murder hornets you totally forgot about. Whoever the victor in this year's election, they'll have to deal with that exact deficit, which is expected to hit 16% of GDP, the highest it's been since 1945. This enormous deficit will be a priority for the POTUS, as he'll have to perform a balancing act of trying to reduce the deficit while ensuring that the economy doesn't lose steam. If the deficit is too aggressively reduced, then it may become detrimental to the economic recovery, which is in part helping reduce the deficit, as millions of previously unemployed Americans find new jobs and therefore no longer require economic assistance from the state. But even despite all the best efforts of the POTUS to reduce the deficit, public debt will have experienced a steep rise. And this is not helped by the fact that the US was running a government budget deficit in the years prior to the magical year that has been 2020. But should we panic about the rapid increase in public debt? Is it really that much of a problem? The effects of the increased government budget deficit on public debt has yet to materialize in annual data, but thanks to some forecasting and quarter-on-quarter data, we can get a rough idea of what is to unfold. First of all, let's take a quick look at the trajectory that public debt was heading in prior to the disease that shall not be named. In raw numbers, the US public debt increased by $3 trillion between Q4 of 2016 and Q4 of 2019. That figure is not to be taken lightly. $3 trillion is more or less the size of the UK's economy. However, as a percentage of GDP, we see that this public debt is not quite as intimidating as originally thought, with it rising nearly 2 percentage points in the 3-year period. Now, given the time frame taken, there's a very just debate that would suggest that the POTUS at the time should have reduced the public debt as a percentage of GDP, but nonetheless, this is what has happened. Since 2020 though, as we've established, the debt story has been very, very different. The most recent data shows that the debt to GDP levels for Q2 of 2020 have rocketed to 135% of GDP. To say that this increase in public debt is extreme is an understatement. You'd have to go back to the world wars to get any data on debt that increases at a similar speed. Now, to those who've managed to attend their Econ 101 class before it got moved to Microsoft Teams, you'll be aware that not all public debt is the same. It can be held by the public or held by foreign and international investors. And it's this subtle difference in public debt that gives us an idea of how sustainable a country's debt pile really is. Now, I won't dive too much into the reasons why, but for the sake of this video, all you need to know is that public debt held by foreign and international investors is considered potentially more problematic than if it is held by the public. Now, with this knowledge fresh in our minds, it's important to look at these two graphs. This one, which is depicting federal debt held by the public as a percentage of GDP, and this one, which is depicting federal debt held by foreign and international investors as a percentage of GDP. Now, what you should be able to notice is that the majority of the increase in the US's public debt in 2020 is a result of the US public acquiring it through government bonds. Now, this doesn't mean that the POTUS is off the hook and he can borrow all he likes. Not at all. What it does illustrate though is that the majority of new fresh debt is domestic, and that leaves us with the big question: how is the POTUS going to pay for all of this? Well, he can pay for it directly by increasing taxes, like income taxes, on certain or all income brackets. Or he can pay indirectly by allowing inflation to run its course, which would impact every single US citizen. Either way, whatever option becomes a reality, one thing will be clear: public debt will be high, and it will be up to the victor of this US election that puts in motion a decision to deal with it. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed this dive into some of the economic issues that will have to be dealt with by whoever wins the US election. Remember to hit that like button, share the video, and subscribe if you're new here. Take care. Bye.